Some dare call it conspiracy.
Welcome to Some Dare Call It Conspiracy with Brent Lee and Neil Sanders. This is Midnight in Riga, a prelude. Today, we are joined by Alexandre Alaphilippe, co-founder and executive director of EU Disinfolab, a leading non-governmental organization dedicated to exposing and combating disinformation across Europe. Our conversation explores the diverse forms of disinformation, including the sophisticated doppelganger campaign, which clones websites and uses AI to spread pro-Russian narratives. We also discuss EU Disinfolab's pivotal role in hosting annual conferences that bring together experts to tackle the evolving landscape of disinformation and misinformation. Join us as we uncover the intricacies of these campaigns and the efforts to combat them. Welcome, Alexandre Alaphilippe. Right, Alex, thank you so much for joining us tonight. How have you been?
Yeah, I'm good. It's December, end of the year, so almost done. Looking forward to start 2025 with less disinformation, of course.
Of course.
Yeah, and thank you as well. Thank you for your hospitality inviting us over to Latvia. We had an absolutely incredible time. Just to explain to everyone, we went to the EU Disinfo Lab conference in Riga, Latvia. It was a two-day event put on by Alex, and it was astonishing. It was full of really, really fascinating characters, talking about all sorts of different sort of concepts about fighting disinformation and where disinformation is coming from and how to tackle it and the problems inherent with that. I have to admit, Alex, I did feel a little bit like a fish out of water, particularly on the first day. Brent and I and Greg rolled up in T-shirts and jeans. and I think the first person that came on was the Foreign Minister of Latvia. And it was at that point that we realised, right, this might be a bit more high level than we were potentially expecting. And so but once we'd had a chat with some of the guys from NATO and some of the guys from PolitiFact and stuff like that, we found our feet a little bit. But it was incredible.
Thanks, Neil. But we are all humans after all. So I think it's good to have also different kinds of people attending the conference, and that's why it's fantastic also to have you, because it's not only like the people that have done all of these kind of 20-year studies that knows everything about the thing. Most of the knowledge on fighting disinformation come from people that are doing this on a daily basis, like what you do, guys, what you've been through, and what you now say to your audience. So I think this kind of mix is really important. And as you said, I think is like nobody cares about how you dress. The important thing is what you bring to the community, and I think you definitely got your place there.
Well, thank you very much. It was a fantastic and very eclectic crowd there. So just before we get into that, could you just explain a bit about your background, Alex, and how you got into starting EU Disinfo Lab?
Sure. My personal background, I've done many things in my life, but mostly like comms studies when I was still in France, back in the 2000s. And after this, I moved to Brussels. I've been freelancing a bit here and there. And I met Gary, my other co-founder, who's also working in another NGO on public safety. So trying to make sure people have access to 112 in Europe. I think it's 999 in the UK.
How are the emergency services?
Yeah, emergency services. So how do you make sure that when your call is made, that you have access to medical doctors, how technology can help on that, and what can be improved in taking people in emergency distress with better solutions. And I've been introduced to the NGO world by that vector. And yes, then we started to work on public safety, what happens during terrorist attacks, rumors during the terrorist attacks, disinformation during the terrorist attacks. And then, disinformation came gradually into my life until we decided to create the NGO.
So, as far as my understanding goes, it originally started as like just the organization, and then it morphed into having the conferences.
Yeah, the conference came quite very early in the thinking. I think when we started the NGO, the thing we had a researcher with us at the time, which was third co-founder. He's not with us anymore, and he also was doing studies and research on disinformation and how this kind of narrative spread online. So
Yeah.
we had both the capacity to say, okay, we can do that kind of research, which is super cool and super interesting, but also it was just after 2016, so just after first election. Now we have to say of Trump, and after Brexit and all that kind of things that were happening in front of our eyes, and we're thinking there are going to be so many people working on that, coming from so different backgrounds, and we have maybe the capacity to bring these people together and to have these kind of events. So I think we already had first conference maybe 1 year after the organization was started. So quickly it was the idea of having a newsletter, having a conference, and being able to talk to everybody. So yes, that was a bit in the design.
So you moved quite quickly into a community-based approach then.
Yeah, it was clear from the beginning that like social scientists had some stuff, journalists had some stuff, fact checkers had other stuff, media literacy people had other stuff, academics had their stuff, but like nobody had a common language. Nobody was used to talk to each other, so everybody was a bit like looking at the other in a bit of like, what are the other guys doing? My job is better than theirs. So we tried to make sure these people could meet, and actually sometimes conference and meeting real people in real life helps a lot, because you realize that you are much more than what you represent. So yeah, and it grew a lot. Disinformation also grew a lot. So I think we had a parallel track with how much was spread online. But we're still a small shop, seven full-time equivalents. It's really small for what we do every year, and what remains to do on a daily basis.
So what we're talking about is we're talking about disinformation. So by disinformation, what do we mean exactly?
So the usual trap is to go into the content stuff. So like disinformation is only like the content that is not true or not factual. You have a part of that. That's the thing. The other thing around disinformation is a question of intent. So the people that are spreading this are really intending to lie to you, intending to spread this, and very often they are hiding this. So the whole question about dissimulation, obfuscation, and how things are going on is also as much important sometimes as the content, because content can be, okay, opinion based, but if you have something opinion based and you think it's spread by 2 million people, if it's your own country, if you're living in the UK, if that's 2 million people, that's great. If it's 2 million people living in India, talking about UK politics, that might not have the same impact on your daily life and how you receive this information. So the whole question about the distribution of it, and like the faith or the factuality that we can have into looking at how this content is distributed online is also very important.
So the concept is that basically you're hoping to pull together people from all sorts of different disciplines, news media, the internet, first government organisations, sort of organisations potentially above governments and such like that, and pull them together to get a sort of combined effort at tackling fake news, for want of a better expression, and things that are sort of So there is one question, Alex, that a lot of people, detractors, might say, like, particularly when they look at some of the organisations that are involved, the World Health Organization and Meta and things like that. Where does the line draw between free speech, disinformation, and censorship? Because obviously the problem with the conspiracy world and stuff like that is they'll look at something like the EU Disinfo Lab, see certain banners and organisations connected to it, and go, well, it's the Illuminati.
Okay, so basically, your question is super important because we're talking about the capacity to express an opinion,
Yeah,
and the capacity to distribute it. That's what I was saying about the question of distribution.
yeah,
So, and also coming to a place where somehow we have seen prioritization of the platforms that distribute speech. So basically, like the forum and the places where we talked were public spaces. You could have, a town hall, you could have like something outside, you could go to a bar, and you had all of that things. And of course, you can say whatever you say here. Now that what we have is like the spaces are not private companies that are managing this. And as private companies, they have not the same input and the same outcome that they are trying to have from what you have to say here. So basically, their goal is not to provide a free space. Their goal is not to provide public space. Their goal is to make sure that at some point there is money coming in. So, and of course, to do that, they have put their own rules, whether we might like them or not, but they have their own rules, and they have to satisfy on how they behave versus legality and application of their own rules. They have to take action into certain type of content, which can go to all types of illegal content. So now what has been happening over the past 15 years is understanding and realizing that these platforms have their own rules, and actually they have a huge power of what they can do or not do. And the issue is as much how they can reduce some voices or let some voices go. And that's the whole question that we're trying to understand right now, is not about saying to platform, you should remove this, you should keep this. It's a question about how do you deal with that? What's your internal process? How did you decide you wanted that away, but you wanted to keep this? What's the decision point that you have made there? And right now, this is completely opaque, and it has already been opaque. And what is very crazy right now is like when people start to say that regulation is actually turning platforms to more censorship, whereas it's actually forcing platforms to explain more what they are doing this. So we are now dealing with regulation that provides much more information to users about what's happening online, but it's been framed as a way to censor people or to limit expression or to give freedom of speech. Nobody has no capacity to do something. If you are not satisfied with what's happening on your meta space or on your X space or on any space online which is hosted by a private company, you have the freedom to create your own space. You can rent a place online. You have your things, and you can do whatever you want. And there are many open source tools that allow you to do that. So we have much more freedom of speech that we had ever in history of mankind, actually, right now. So the question that we face right now is that these platforms with their audiences um, have the capacity to put some rules. And what we want to know is what kind of rules do they have? How do they enforce it? How do they not enforce it? And what is the end goal? And what can we know about how to deal with that kind of questions? Because we want to know how they're making that decisions.
So do you actually notice like a marked difference between the different platforms? And we don't have to name names, but like are some platforms more prevalent with disinformation?
I think platforms have different ways to tackle this, and we've seen that management of platforms can have a huge impact on how it goes. And we've
Yeah.
seen that, of course, when so I'm going to take like different examples. So we can say a lot of awful things about platforms, but we can also compare how other space are behaving. So basically, I remember at the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, there was a platform called Odyssey, which is still there.
Yeah.
Which Odyssey is now serves as another place for content that is banned from other platforms,
Yeah.
with like a decentralized distribution of content. If you typed Bucha, so what happened in Bucha in Ukraine, the massacre of Ukrainian people by the Russian army. If you type Bucha on Odyssey, you had only things about Bucha is a fake, Bucha is staged, and that's
Right.
the only result that you had. If you type this on YouTube, you had mostly like reports on like investigations on how the massacre was committed and what was the responsibility of the different stakeholders, the Russian army in particular. So you can see that without any kind of moderation that you have here in terms of what's been reflected, you can have completely different events and completely different results. So that's one action that the platform can do. And what we've seen with the takeover of X by Elon Musk, we see that you can reduce the teams of trust and safety. You can decide to put in advance much more some content than other through the algorithm. And that is reflecting on what people see and what people consume. I left X a few weeks ago, but I can tell you that the last weeks I was on that platforms, the only thing I could see was UFC championship and MMA fights. I'm not following any of these accounts. I have absolutely no interest in MMA, but that was pushed by the platform, and we know it's something that is very, very well seen by some of the main users of the platforms right now.
Yeah.
So we do see that all recommender systems and all the teams that are in place of a platform actually have an impact on how you see news and how you see the world. And that's why we want to have a strong regulation about understanding how this algorithm works, what is being pushed, and for which reason, and possibly also to have capacity to have more algorithms available to people so they can actually build their own ones. And that's what Blue Sky has been working on lately.
It's interesting you mentioned those platforms because Odyssey and Rumble, particularly, are favoured by the sort of conspiracy crowd for exactly the reasons that you say, because you can get anti-vax stuff on there, you can get um, anti-government stuff without much sort of pushback, really. One of the other places, obviously, is X, and the sort of where this all sort of like comes together is Alex Jones and the promotion of very clear Russian propaganda. And I think it happens for different reasons. I think it happens with Alex Jones because Roger Stone lied to him and told him that Putin was a fan. That's literally what happened. And a guy called Steve Pachenik. And with the conspiracy world, it comes down to sort of contrarianism. The mainstream media says this, and so we've got to find the opposite, and that is the where you go and find it on Rumble and Odyssey. And this is the $1,000,000 question, Alex. Obviously, and it's like, I appreciate that there isn't a simple answer, but where does this disinformation come from? Is it as simple as saying it's Russia?
No, it's much more complex than this, and it's rooted in so many things. I think that's a result of so many different confluences of influence, actually, that are bringing you to a space where what you should believe and take a stand right now. And I think that's what we see right now about what's happening in many events in the world. Just like people, just like you need to take a stand about what you think right now about what's happening in Syria, what's happening in Romania, but information needs to sink in about this. You can have elements and you can have a lot of things happening, and you have like some indications of what's happening, but you don't have the full story yet, of course. And sometimes it takes 20 years, 50 years, 100 years to have the full story of something that happened. But we are now in a battle of influence that everybody wants to be right the first. And of course, there is a pressure to publish and a pressure to sway audiences to very, very polarized issues. So the thing is, like, it was very funny because you mentioned like anti-vax or anti-government. It's like there is a freedom of thinking. You can be anti-vax. You can decide to not vaccinate yourself because you think it's not good. But at the point that you're saying to audiences things that are not true about vaccines, then you have an impact. Then you actually what you believe is turning into something that is not what you think it is, but is turning into like more communications and like with much more responsibility to the audience that you are serving. In the same like with anti-government stuff, so you can definitely think that Trump is the right president for the US. That's fine. But you cannot say that there has been no attacks on 6th January on the Capitol because we know this and that's a fact. And we are actually mixing this kind of, what I believe from what I want people to believe because I want them to believe like me, and this kind of tribal behavior that we have more and more online when people needs to belong to tribes, and then they have to believe into the side of the story that they are,
Yeah,
Um,
factions, like, yeah.
So the question here is how to remain factual and how to acknowledge that sometimes you don't know. That's something that it's hard to say right now because you are always pressed to have an opinion on everything. I'm proud to have an opinion on very little things in my life, and I'm happy to change opinion over the course of time. And at the same time, we're also in a space where, because of how the internet has been built, we're also in a place where internet has a hypermnesia issue, where everything that you say will be used and weaponized maybe 5, 10, 15, 25 years from now to make you say something that you are maybe not thinking anymore. And some bad actors are using this to sway the responsibility, but also it's also used to weaponize people that maybe 20 years from now, I will receive a lot of shitloads of comment on what is the new YouTube about what I'm saying tonight. So We also need, because internet is so flat in terms of contextualization, in terms of what you know about somebody at a place, at a time, and how they form their thinking. And you cannot take a stand on everything. And everything I'm saying right now is not a stand that maybe I will take all my life, and maybe I will move to other spaces and other thinking at some time in my life. Depend what's happening to me. You know.
Absolutely. So, I mean, a lot of people listening might be sort of taxing, oh, disinformation. It's like, it's just the internet, blah, blah, blah. What's a really good example of extremely damaging disinformation? Or what are the potential consequences that can come of these things?
I think we've seen a lot of things about not only anti-vax, but like a lot around fake meds and like people like praising cures.
Yeah.
Sometimes also we've seen groups, radical groups, also praising how to cure things like
Yeah. Yeah.
homosexuality. Treating homosexuality as a disease. So we've seen that this has definitely an impact. We've seen gender-based disinformation and how it led to more harassment of people that are women or people from different identities, background, whether it's from where they come from or how they feel as a person. We've seen disinformation during elections. And when we've seen what happened in 6 January 2021, if you look at the documentary that has been done on this, you can see the impact on disinformation on people. That really scared that the election has been stolen. But there was absolutely no clue of that, and not even the beginning of a clue of that. It almost a coup if we think about it. And people died because of that, because they were so angry that they tried to attack guards that had to fire, and that's dramatic, the kind of thing that it can bring. So we are seeing real world impact on this, on how democracy functions, and the tribalization of politics is really something that is frightening me, because the less we have this capacity to talk and to think and to have these kind of discussions, the more we are getting into a fight, and the less we can compromise and to agree on doing things together. And that's what's really frightening me right now.
So, like, obviously, myself and Neil, we kind of keep our eye on the UK and America, and you've got a good vantage point of seeing what's going on in Europe. Is this radicalization of politics like sweeping across Europe as well?
Yeah, definitely. And we see this, that we have more and more difficulties to form coalitions in Europe, and these coalitions are also, we can see that there is more and more radicalization towards more radical policies, using a lot of disinformation about migration, for instance,
Yeah.
to move their agenda to the far right. And we see how some actors are benefiting to this. We see how disinformation on platforms with like influencers being paid off platforms to spread messages can have an impact on how a candidate is being seen. And a candidate can go from 2 to 22% in 2 weeks. So we see that this is happening right now in front of us. And we also see that, as we mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, that this question of capture of the things like freedom of speech, which becomes complete liberalization and privatization of speech by private companies and billionaires. So we do see that there is a capture of these things for private interest or for political interest. And that's what's very worrying, because if we don't have a strong civil society in capacity to work on that and to be the buffer zone and to hold accountable everyone, then you are basically alone between platforms and governments. And that's the worst place that you want to be, because like there are very, very different interests very often between these kind of stakeholders.
The sort of weaponization of politics, particularly towards the far right, we've seen examples like Reform in the UK, Meloni in Italy, various other people, AFD, places like that, Golden Dawn and stuff like that. Are they riding on the back of that disinformation, or are they producing that disinformation? Like, is there a concerted effort between all the different parties or is it one of these things where they just happen to converge on interests?
I don't think there's no conspiracy. I think I'm on the right podcast to talk about that. There is absolutely no conspiracy on this, but yes, people are looking about what's working on, and of course they repeat. So if they see that's working on one country, of course you have companies that will just like look at the playbook and copy paste the stuff. And we come from a place where we were thinking that, Russia was putting a lot of effort into that and was like masterminding everything. But what we've seen recently in the US is like now we have like a self-conscious media alternative sphere online that can actually feed all that stuff. You mentioned the Alex Jones, but also the Joe Rogan and all that people, huge audiences right now, and can definitely go in that agenda in full autonomy because they know that's bringing money, they know that's bringing political capital, so that works.
This is an interesting point because they've almost like created the arena where the audience is wanting the disinformation. They want to be told certain things by Joe Rogan. They want to be told certain things by Candice Owens or your tenant media lot, your Tim Pauls and stuff like that. Like, and this is the flipping of reality almost, basically, to the point where, like, if Tim Paul didn't stick up for Russia, his audience would leave him. And that's a very, very bizarre, dangerous sheep leading the shepherd almost, isn't it?
Yeah, it's part of human being also. Where we are, that's Palo Alto communication studies. In the 60s, 70s. If some of your readers know about this more than I do, I apologize for any mistakes on that. But like, there is all of these concepts about two steps of communication. So you're actually not getting your source directly from the source. You actually believe somebody that will treat this and will actually more or less go with what you think. So one of the things that I'm trying to do myself, for instance, is trying to read very different sources and things that I very much disagree with, but trying to understand what brings them to that thinking. But also, we are these agendas are also very well served by, and there are very good critics, like sociological thinkers about that, like Hartmut Rosa, which is a German sociologist, about how modernism is also playing in our modern society. So basically, Rosa's point is about how we have since 19th century, end of 18th century, we have acceleration of time. So we have constantly this kind of impression that time is accelerating, and we have new technologies that are helping us to go faster, further, and we have to deal with all of that, which is great. We look at what, like 5 years ago, we didn't have ChatGPT. Even 2 years ago, we didn't have ChatGPT, and now we have the capacity to, use this to get inputs, to get some feedback very, very, very quickly, and that's at a pace we've never seen before. However, our democratic systems are not made for that speed, because policy making takes 5, 10, 15 years. It's very complex systems, somebody tries to do tariff, the other one replies, takes 6 months, then 1 year, it starts out, and your elections are already every 5 years, if you're lucky. And sometimes you see the results of a policy maybe 15 or 20 years after. But what we have with acceleration is like we want people, and what I was mentioning with hypermnesia, we want people to be right now, to always have been right, to be right fruitfully for the next 15 years, but to deliver results right now. So and if they don't do that, we get into frustration mode. They said they would do that, they never do this, and we're getting into all that anger about not delivering it stuff. But because everything we do in life is about being served instantaneously about our needs. We want something, we go on a platform, we buy it, it's delivered in the same day. You don't need to wait 2 weeks to get your book or to get your iPhone or to get that things. And if you actually wait more than 2 days, you're probably going to change provider to find another one that is serving you faster. Same with food. And so all of our basic needs right now are served instantaneously, and the platforms have been built and have developed services for that, always to serve you faster and with more accuracy to your needs. But politics is not about that.
Well, the problem I've seen with that, and I'm sure you're aware of this, is that basically the innovation, it breeds impatience in people. And so people tend to want an answer rather than necessarily the right answer. They just want to, people have become accustomed to just basically being comforted is the wrong word, but provided with the service that they are after. And often disinformation, information, people are using it as a service, either on sort of social media for an argument or to bolster an opinion that they've got, or to a part of their personality or something like that. And so it really is a double-edged sword, isn't it? I mean, for example, you've got I've seen some chat GPT stuff that's spat out and I've gone, I know that's wrong. Do you know what I mean? But basically, because that's becoming the sort of the go-to, people go to it. I suppose it's very similar to at the beginning of Google Maps when people would just follow it into rivers and things like that. Like, do you know what I mean? It is a little bit like that, but it must be a challenge. Speaking of challenges, we appear to have a bit of a perfect storm brewing. Um, we've got Donald Trump, who basically got elected on a platform of disinformation, is known to be an incredible liar, backed by Elon Musk, who's not always entirely accurate. And he's basically inviting people like Robert Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, all known for being huge purveyors of disinformation and, if we want to like not muck about, lies. And they seem to be incredibly popular. What's what's going to happen?
That's not a 1 million, that's a $1 billion question. I have no idea. I'm concerned. I'm concerned mostly for people working right now in the US in research centers, because there will be a movement that will cut federal funding for many academics working on this topic. I think we've seen already before this election how it was made impossible by the Congress and some members of the Congress on the Republican side for many researchers to work in a safe space. And I think that's very worrying, because if you don't have the capacity to work in full independence as an academic, whether some departments might close, some people might stop researching this. So I think that's what's happening. So a very drastic reduction of studies, and we might see a lot of additional money because these platforms are not regulated, going to that kind of influencers. So a lot of incentives for people doing disinformation, like political capital, money, not that much to disincentivize them and to put them in another space. I can only hope that Europe will understand this and being able to welcome these people that might not be able to work in the US. I wish that would be taken, because I think we should welcome people that cannot work on this freely right now, and we have a huge responsibility to help them. I think that's how we should get together.
So, with regard to sort of looking forward to sort of solutions, and again, I appreciate these are all very sort of like high level questions. But what do we think? Regulation or education, or a combination of both?
It's combination. It's regulation. So making sure like we know how these platforms are behaving, what kind of decisions they are making, how do they prepare, how do they work with people, including civil society, including dealing with people that are flagging content on their stuff, and what kind of protection they can put in place. Also, not only platform regulation, but also financial regulation. Political ads
Yeah.
is mostly about off platform. It's not about platforms. It's about making sure that we don't have illegal money coming into politics or non-declared money coming into politics. And that's something that we also need to work on. Also goes into more funding for civil society, people doing the job on the field, being able to continue doing this, because if we rely on them, but they are not there anymore, then we have an issue. Education, yes. Sometimes I think that like the Cartesian way of looking at things, I'm French, so like Descartes, we've been trained to think like Descartes, so very, very rationally. I think we cannot doubt of everything. I think also we need to believe that the system is working. We cannot verify every individual that is working for the government. And I think if we do this, it's really actually Orwellian and society of surveillance, which is actually sometimes what conspiracy theorists are promoting, like denouncing surveillance, but willing to surveil anybody doing everything to make sure they are doing something, which looks to me like very opposite to what they claim they defend. And I think have more capacity to tell these stories and to have people out of these conspiracy loops, like what you guys are doing, is, I think, right out crucial to make sure these stories are told and to make sure we can build back these kind of connections. I think the worst thing that could happen is like consider that everybody is lost and we don't make any efforts anymore and that's it. No, I think we have a huge human connection to make with all of these people that fell into these traps for many reasons, and to help them to understand they've been lied to, and that they have the way to go back to this, which is not believing blindly what everybody else is saying, but like to build their own journey of truth and fact finding.